Good morning, everybody. I want to thank you for attending the Bank of the Future webinar. Have a lot of stuff to cover today, and hopefully this will be useful whether you're marketing, customer service, or on the technology side of banks. I want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. Everybody's on mute only for attendees. There are a couple of things in your bar. You'll see there's a Q&A tab. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can submit those and we'll leave time at the end to answer any questions. There's also under the handouts tab, there are 2 infographics that you can download in PDF form for attending. This webinar is being recorded. The recording, you will get an email notification, will come out in a few days. So if you have any colleagues that couldn't attend, you can share that recording. So let's get started. There's a lot of controversy talking about understanding different generations and where those generations headed over the next few years, and how does that really make a difference from a marketing or a customer experience standpoint. So we're going to start off talking a little bit about that. The average American interacts with some form of customer service over 65 times per year. And really the millennials have led the charge in really defining that next level of customer service and customer experience, and it really being a key driver in making product and buying decisions. It's estimated by 2020 that customer experience will be the #1 decision in making a reason to work with a company over product and pricing. So many executives, it's really keeping them up at night as how do they define that customer experience? How does that customer experience appeal for all demographics? So when you look by generation, you know, Gen Z has a lot of interactions with customer experience. They really won't do business with a company for up to 2 years if they've had a bad customer experience. Very self-reliant, looking for convenience. On the millennial side, millennials will stop immediately doing business with someone when they have a bad customer experience. They really want high-touch customer experience. They want convenience. They want it how they want it, when they want it. And then if you look at the Gen Zs, which is the demographic that's under 21, that's the next kind of generation of buyers and quickly rising, they're a little bit different from millennials. Customer experience is very important to them, but unlike millennials, they shop more in brick and mortar stores. They really want to know that face behind the company of who they're working with. And weirdly enough, they prefer face-to-face interactions over text messaging. So when you think about, you know, kids, and you think about, you know, really working, seeing kids, you know, FaceTime each other, things like that, that's kind of your next generation of how they want to interact with business. On the workforce side, you know, looking at who's coming into the workforce, millennials are going to make up the majority of the workforce by 2025. Gen X is still leading the charge of, you know, starting the most businesses in the U.S. They're the largest business banking customers. They're the ones that are starting companies. And Gen Zs, more than any other demographic, if you look at all the research around Gen Zs, it's the most likely generation to go straight into the workforce and not into college. They're all about starting their own businesses, starting them in their teens. And, you know, we might see a shift there in college versus starting companies. So definitely keep in mind that these are your future business banking clients. Establishing that consumer banking relationship with them now. They typically, you know, do take influence from mom and dad of where to bank, but especially the millennial demographic, you know, they want to do something different than mom and dad. So what is the industry showing on consumer trends? Looking at, we've always in the US and even in the UK followed consumer communication trends. So back when text messaging was really big in 2007, 2008, and there was a big rise in enterprise text messaging where businesses for the first time really started text messaging offers to consumers' phones, started communicating with them, even from a banking standpoint on alerts. That all followed the communication trends from consumer to consumer. When looking at the same thing with email, it used to be that you had to have the same email provider. So you could only email, AOL to AOL, and then it went across the board. And then business email to consumer started really taking off. You see the same with instant messaging apps. Now companies are offering Facebook instant messaging to communicate. And then you'll see the same thing with video chat. More and more than we've seen over the years, people are really videoing each other. And so, whether that's, iPhone to iPhone, whether that's Skype, whether that's through Snapchat or WhatsApp or something of that nature, now consumers are wanting to video with businesses, and you'll see that trend going up. So if you look at the video chat market that, just last year was only a $60 million market and it going to 1.7 billion by 2021, we're going to see a lot of that communication trend happening in the States, as well as you've already seen that happening in the UK and other progressive countries. So I really like this chart over here to the right that KPMG put out that really showed, how the digital disruption is going to happen in the banking in the US. We've always followed, as a different look at this, we've always followed the trends of, what happened in the music industry. So what happened when we shifted from, CDs to iTunes and those buying trends, and how that really disrupted, CD sales. And, on the video side, when we started, going and getting, movies at Redbox, and then we shifted to getting them on demand, and then we shifted to Netflix. Those trends will follow the same in banking disruption. And so depending upon which analyst you kind of, follow in or believe in, it's projected that we're kind of in year 4 to year 6 of that peak. And so looking at, being a, banking executive on here, that really kind of has you pay attention of, what you need to do over, the next few months and few years to really be thinking about that. So where's banking headed globally? So if you look at really what's going on outside of the US and more progressive countries, which we always follow behind in the US, in 2011, just as some examples here, in the Britain branches, there were 478 million transactions. And last year, there were only 280 million. So the transactions that are actually happening in brick and mortar have reduced, dramatically. In the UK, if you look at, the big traditional branches that are reducing branches by 50%, it's really due to the increase in the mobile app transactions and really the increase of video banking. So you look at Rover models, you look at the ability to have smaller branches, smaller footprints, and give the consumer more kind of channel of choice of how they want to interact with their banker. The mobile banking transactions continue to just go up year over year. And by 2022, it's projected to go up 121% from even what it is today. The decrease is really on the desktop and laptop side, decreasing 63% over the next, 4 to 5 years from where it is today. This, again, if you look back at talking about the demographics, our Gen Zs and our millennials are, digital natives. They're on the go. The use of laptops and desktops for that demographic is very low. So that follows kind of that trend line of what you should be thinking about on the generation side. Looking at branch visits, it's going to drop across all demographics. So as you look, in the banking industry of trying to think about, we've created this culture of, you can do everything on your phone, you can do everything in online banking. And so banking has really created this culture that, you come into the branch if you have an issue. Banks didn't really want to create that culture, but by giving the technology and a lot of the expectations of what consumers need, it's created that culture of you go into the branch when you have a problem. And so that's kind of reduced branch visits across the board. So households that have without children, meaning, they don't really have a need to go into the branch as much as when they had younger children, is projected to go from 8 visits a year on average to 3 over the next 5 years. When you look at Gen Zs who are establishing their life, their first kind of banking relationship, most Gen Zs got their first debit card when they were 14 years old. So they've been working with mom and dad's bank, from their preteen to teen years. They're going to go from 6 visits to 2 visits a year over the next couple of years. And that's because they're, getting older in that cycle of life. They're going off to college and the need to go into physical branches is reduced. When you look at the largest, the heaviest branch users, which are elderly and low income, they're 5 times more likely to go mobile banking and increase, the largest demographic in mobile banking of any other banking relationships. So that will cut branch transactions down from that perspective as well. Looking a little bit about video banking and some of kind of the case studies around, looking at what banking executives are talking about with video banking and thinking about how that adheres to, the branch model. 10% last year, 10% of banks had rolled out video banking. Over 50% of banks have plans to roll out banking this year in 2017. And within a couple of years, over 80% have plans to roll out video banking. The benefits we'll talk about a little bit later, but it's definitely one of the hottest topics of Bank of the Future is video banking and how's that working. Some of the main benefits, and these are industry numbers, not numbers from us. 93% of banks believe that video will increase their customer satisfaction. So when you look at increase in NPS score, when you look at reduction in cost, it's kind of a win-win both on the consumer side as well and business banking side as well as the bank side. Pulled a couple of results that are known out in the industry that are third party. Nationwide Financial in the UK rolled out video banking on their mortgage side, and they saw a 75% increase in new mortgage business. They also saw a 2/3 reduction in cost and double-digit increase in NPS. When you look at Royal Bank of Scotland, very similar. They reduced loan applications from 2 hours via phone to 1 hour via video chat. The ability to, folks to not have to drive in the car was obviously another example when you look at, big cities and traffic and all that kind of stuff. Those take into effect as well. So what does the Bank of the Future look like? There's different opinions of what the Bank of the Future look like. It's definitely not a one size fits all. It's more of a hybrid model. A couple of things, the biggest thing keeping executives up at night is really not worrying about each other and traditional banks. It's really, the rise of the branchless banks, the fintechs banks that are rising. There was a new report that came out just last week that, the number of account openings by bank, the top 5 were online only banks, and venture capital has invested, $25 billion over the last 4 years. And while, for their top banks, that seems like a drop in the bucket, consumers are flocking to the branchless banks. And a couple of the reasons why, when you talk about a branchless bank, you're talking about a bank that has fresh technology. There's no legacy systems. There's no constraints. There's no constraint thinking of we've done it this way for 25 years. It's not having to have a huge culture shift. You're starting with that out of the gate. And so when you look at consumers and businesses that, we already have pretty much everybody's getting paid. The majority of, demographics are getting paid through remote deposit. So the need to go take your paycheck to a physical branch is much less than it used to be. Everybody's using debit cards. There's still obviously, paper checks out there, but people are still using, debit cards, credit cards. We're paying our bills online. We're paying our bills through phone, through online. And, now we can remote deposit. It wasn't long ago that, taking the picture of your check through your mobile app, it took a while for banks to get on board from a security perspective. The limits were very low, and now those limits are significantly higher. And so the ability to, take remote pictures of your check and deposit those without having to go into a branch or be able to deposit those through an ATM. Most of these online banks are offering free wires, any ATM with no fees, and making it very convenient to not have to drive across town and go to a specific ATM. You can go to any ATM and those fees are reimbursed. So when you think about, the millennials and those Gen Zs that like convenience, they like options, they don't like to be tethered, that's very attractive. And then when you look across all demographics, everybody wants, the highest rate for their money, right? And what these online banks have been able to do is because their costs are significantly less, they're offering the highest rates or the best mortgage rate or the best auto loan rate because they don't have the overhead of brick and mortar. And so when you take that coupled with what's driving customer experience, and technology plays a large portion of that, what's driving experience. Not to mention a lot of these online banks don't have typical banker hours. So when you think about being able to video or call or text a particular online bank and they're open till 9 o'clock at night, and your brick and mortar bank closes at 5 or 6, and you don't get off work until 7 o'clock at night, you really don't have a lot of, alternatives to be able to go into that bank or contact that bank. So that's driving, a good amount of those customer decisions. So let's talk a little bit about, the hybrid model. What we really feel of the bank of the future is a combination. So when you look at the physical branch, you look at reduced square footage. So when you start talking to executives on, when you're used to be opening these big branches with a lot of space, a lot of people, that's kind of a thing of the past. And we're already seeing that in the US of smaller footprints, reduced number of locations, and less branch employees. So the typical bank has around 8 employees per branch, seeing that being reduced to, a smaller number, maybe 3, maybe 4. And then having centralized resources that are specialty resources, which you already see with the big banks, and then branch distribution. So what does that mean? That means that in the interior, you're seeing tablets for basic transactions for maybe those folks that, aren't doing mobile banking. You have your greeting station, which you already see a lot in banks today. And then having remote video both in the branch as well as consumers being able to do it from their own device, sitting at home, that connect to your specialty branches or centralized. So you see today that most of the big banks don't have auto loans or mortgage or credit card experts in individual branch locations. That's either in a contact center environment or it's in certain number of branches. Very similar to your, wealth management and your private client banking. And so we've already started to make those shifts in the US. So now it's convenience for the customer. So, you have a cube in a branch, you have an office in a branch, the ability for them to go right in and click a button, be able to video with the mortgage specialist and do that right in the branch, or be able to direct them to be able to do that as soon as they get home or from their own device. And so you have employees set up in these centralized locations or specialty locations that accept those video banking. And that still allows you to, have that personalized relationship with the consumer or the business banker, still create that in-person, that face-to-face through video, still be able to review accounts, to be able to cross-sell, upsell, to review, what's going on in their life, but do it with the convenience of the customer. And then on the customer side, it's really, the increase in mobile app banking, which is across all demographics, really the mobile video banking connecting to a branch or a centralized location. So with the video banking technology, the consumer doesn't need to be in the branch. They can be at home, they can be at the office, in their car, wherever they need to be, and still talk to somebody in the branch as if they were standing in front of them. And then when you start looking at the video technology in the branch drive-throughs and ATMs, things like that, when you start looking at expensive hardware and software to support that, you'll start to see some of the banks transitioning that to letting the consumer use their own device. So they're not tethered to having that conversation and tying up a drive-through line or tying up an ATM line, and they can have that comfort. So one of the banks I want to give kudos to is First Florida Bank, who rolled this model out, or similar model to this, maybe not everything in this hybrid model, but they rolled out their first kind of Bank of the Future branch around a couple years ago. That was kind of a low performing branch. There's a great article if you want to Google it. And that branch was doing about $35 million a year in deposits. That's become their number one branch, their flagship branch. They're increasing all their future branches to kind of that branch. And, it almost quadrupled their revenue just by going to that model. So people want to come to that branch. People actually drive to that branch. And so it shows you where, the regional community banks really can make a difference in having these by reducing their costs, increasing the revenue, and the customer experience is much greater. So what should you be thinking about in terms of video banking? So, we talked to a lot of executives in banking. They're trying to get their head around, where does it make sense? What areas of the bank should we really be looking at? How does that change our operations? So let's talk a little bit about that. So when you talk about the different banking channels, so, as we talked about earlier, 93% of people surveyed, banking executives said, it would strongly have a positive impact or have a positive impact to roll out video banking. You have, Barclays that did a big push in video banking that say that their customers now demand to have video banking. You see other banking that, 65% of video banking customers are repeat users. So they use it, they like it, they continue to use it. So when you really look at the banking channels in this chart, we look at a branch of visit, it's really not convenient for a customer, right? It's low convenience. It costs the bank, it's high cost for the bank to get people to come into the branch, but the customer engagement's high, right? So you want people to come in the branch. You can ask them, about what's going on in their life. You can try to sell them products. But really, we've created this culture of I don't want to go into the branch unless I have a problem. So when I go into the branch, you know, you got kids to pick up from school, you know, you've just fought traffic, you're on a time schedule. You're not really open anymore to having those conversations. And that really puts your branch employees in a bad situation on, you know, increasing revenue for those branches. When you talk about remote banking, so, you know, I'm calling in on the phone, or, you know, I'm on my mobile app or online banking. Very high from convenience standpoint for the customers, very low cost for the bank, but there's no engagement. You know, there's no way to go in. You know, you can, you know, talk to them on the phone, maybe text chat, but you're not building that relationship. So when you look across the demographics on face-to-face video banking, you know, it's kind of the win-win both from the banking side as well as the customer side. It increases the engagement, it reduces the cost, and it really allows you to increase revenue for that particular customer. So what services make the most sense from a banking standpoint? Obviously, you're probably thinking complex services, which is definitely on point. So, you know, when you talk about private client banking, you talk about investment, you talk about wealth management, mortgage. So, you know, customers are already kind of in a stressful situation of applying for a mortgage. So when you think about, you know, a first-time home buyer, you think about a VA loan. You think about, you know, kind of the jumbo loans, maybe a little bit more high maintenance, auto loans. So you see a lot of the big banks going to auto loans and, you know, apply online, we'll mail you a check. There's a lot of questions around that. When you look at the website conversion rate of that, you know, it's really low. And it's really low because most folks, they may want to go with the big bank, but they don't know, like, does the check get mailed to me? Does it go to the dealership? How does all that work? And if you could click a button and video with a specialist, your conversion rate would be significantly higher. And so what are some of the top reasons that banking executives have said they wanted to implement video banking? Increasing customer sat, being an innovative bank. So when you look at, you know, a lot of your mid-tier banks that are trying to have competitive advantage, be seen as innovative technology, when typically they've been seen as, you know, having subpar technology to the big banks due to budget, right? And so those are some of the kind of the top scenarios of why to implement. So let's look at really what types, you know, where do customers want video banking? So we talk about credit cards. Every day, you know, people are getting tons and tons of offers in the mail, online, and there's so many credit cards to choose from. So when you think about, you know, how help me choose a card, you know, understand me, understand, you know, am I a traveler? Do I like loyalty? I want cash back, things like that, that, you know, you can't get from a couple buttons clicking from online surveys. When you think about your business banking customers, so if you think back to our generations, we think about, you know, the big generations that are, you know, our Gen Zs are our future business owners, right? Our millennials are starting businesses. You know, our Gen Xs are the largest demographic of business owners. It's all about convenience. You know, you're busy business owners. You know, you're on the go. Availability is king. You talk about, you know, home services, field services, restaurant owners, retail. You know, they don't have banking hours. So the availability to click a button, to talk to somebody, not have to go into the branch is highly attractive. When you think about areas that have already been centralized and plugging and playing this into contact centers or centralized lending, you think about small business loans, auto, mortgage, things like that. And then on the HR side, which a lot of people don't really think about is, you know, if you're an HR executive for the bank, when you look back at, you know, who you're hiring and what's the workforce, being able to remotely interview and recruit those innovative, you know, kind of tech future employees, being able to reduce your costs, get a higher caliber of folks, you know, that's obviously a big area when we talk about video chat versus video banking on how to be an innovative bank. So let's look at just a couple of images here of how you integrate it into your existing customer experience. So when you think about the mobile app you have today, maybe you don't have a mobile app. This could be kind of your, flagship, your carrot. The ability to drop in a video button throughout the customer experience. So if I'm on an auto loan and, I'm reading through, I'm interested, there's a video button. Literally with the click of a button, I can be videoing in with an auto loan specialist or maybe a mortgage specialist. Dropping the icons and call to actions in on desktop, that fires up the consumer screen and allows them to talk about somebody about opening a new account. Giving that flexibility, it's not for everybody. Some people won't want video banking. They want to text chat, they want to call, or they just want to service themselves online. But giving those options to increase the conversion rate. So when you're thinking of video banking and it's new to you and you're thinking about all the things kind of to consider of, what I should be thinking about when selecting a video banking partner and how to integrate that in, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. So consumer technology won't work. We get this question all the time. People think, well, I could just FaceTime with my customers, or maybe we'll do Skype, things like that. Those technologies are really meant for if you're on a wireless network and you're not, on a carrier network. So, it's low quality video, not very high quality HD. I'm sure you've experienced very high disconnect rates yourself if you're trying to FaceTime or do Google Duo with one of your kids. You get the freeze framing, you get the, drop connection, things of that. So not something you want to put in front of your customers, have them get frustrated with. And then the main thing is, user to user information has to be exchanged. So it really goes outside of your kind of routing and, how you work window. So when you think about, I may have a personal banker that I work with, but, what if I have their personal information and I'm trying to video with them and they're off today, or, they no longer work for the bank. So really, looking at technology, none of those can be branded. So you can't integrate it with your existing mobile app or website. There's not any SDKs, the ability to integrate in. And, it's not a uniform user experience because you'd have to take them outside of the app. The main thing is, how do you operationalize it to just plug and play into your business? So whether somebody's in the branch, whether somebody's in a contact center environment, you have to think about, how do I queue these video calls? How do I route it between my branches? How do I route it in a centralized environment? How do I track what's going on? How do I know that branch employee A talked to customer B on this date, this time, for this long? Why did they call? And really measuring the success. So, what does the customer think? How do I measure that increase in NPS? How do I measure that customer satisfaction? How do we improve? And so those are some of the things that, why consumer technology won't work. So what are some of the key components to consider when you're looking at, video banking, looking at video banking technology? Number one, how easy is it to integrate into your user experience? Obviously, any marketer is going to tell you the rule of thumb, keep them within the constraints of your own website, keep them in the constraints of your own app. As soon as you direct them off, your conversion rate goes, down dramatically. So how do we integrate it into our existing customer experience? How is the effort minimal for the end customer, not confusing? What are the hardware and software requirements? So there's a lot of technology out there that requires a lot of expensive hardware to do video banking, similar to, what you're having to purchase for, ATMs and, servers and, all those kind of things. And then there's companies that, it's software as a service. You plug it in, you use, internet, you use, webcams that you may have on a laptop, or maybe you have to get a $20 webcam through a USB. But those are things to think into consideration. So not only what is it going to cost you to roll out today, but what's it going to cost you to scale it in the future. Time to implement. Most of the banks that we talk to and that, help advise, it's really competitive advantage, right? And, hey, is this going to take me 6 months to roll it out? Is it going to take me 12 months? The number one question we always get is, my IT's backed up for a really long time. How much involvement is there? And so those are things to take into consideration. When you're looking at an overall solution, what's the time to implement? When can you get it out there? And, can you get some competitive advantage? Can you get some feedback on, a smaller rollout or a pilot, learn from that, and then roll it out and scale? And then really a knowledgeable team. I mean, in the US and, some parts of other countries, video banking's new. So, partner yourself with kind of experts in the industry, people that have been executives in your shoes, whether, it's banking or insurance or whatever it may be, that understand, where your, pains are in running operations or running marketing or running your contact center. And they understand, what it's going to take to implement it, what it's going to take for you to be successful. And then really the data and reporting side, some of the platforms you need to go out and build, your own reporting and do your own tracking. And, with all the other systems that you have going on, that's going to require a lot of IT time. So really, what reporting can you get out of the gate? What can you start tracking? What you're going to want to track today is going to be very different than what you're going to want to track in, 12 to 24 months. But, what can you learn from today to be able to, gain more insights and analytics in the future? And then really looking at, the ROI. The ROI can be very significant for banks depending upon size and transactions. And really looking at, okay, what's my total cost of ownership going to be today? What's going to be when I scale? What is that going to increase my revenue? What's that going to reduce my cost? And really figuring that out and determining the payback. I mean, some video banking, sees payback in a month. Some it could be 12 months. So really determining what areas of the bank would benefit the most and what's the ROI by those departments. So talking a little bit about, what One Touch Video Chat, is doing, and, a little bit about our technology is when you really look at kind of what makes us different and what we've done is, number one, we're industry executives. We created the technology. We come from backgrounds of banking, of insurance. We've been in, we've consulted with every bank there is. We've run the contact centers. So we built this with that in mind. We've been in your shoes. We know what it's like to be in your shoes. And so if you look at this diagram here on the left-hand side, what we really thought about was, what does the business need? So what do the marketing and customer service operation professionals need? What does the consumer need? So, whether that's a consumer or whether that's a business customer, what do they really want out of this? And then what does the technology team want? How do we make it easy for your technology folks to not have to think about it and not have to put it into their long implementation cycle? And so what we've really built is, plug and play technology. So the ability to, no hardware, no software, roll it into whether it's the branches or the contact center, roll it in really easy within days, within weeks, no long implementation. What we really work with the business is, what are the right use cases? How do you roll it out? How do you think about training? How do you think about what the employees should wear? How do you think about the background environment? Do you have to hire separately? Do you take a subset of folks that you already have and see who would be good? face-to-face in front of customers and really help you kind of, get that idea to tuition. Low cost to implement. So, we're not selling a bunch of hardware like, some of the other folks in the industry, make so the investment's not large to kind of get into the game. And then really making it branded. So, we made a decision early on to stay completely behind the scenes. So, it looks like it's the bank's technology. It looks like, everything. And we're kind of behind the scenes, while the banks gloat. And really the customer surveys. So what's great about, kind of our platform without, tooting the horn is at the end of the video transaction, being able to get instant customer feedback from a customized survey, then being able to get the employee feedback and say, how does that match up? Did the employee like to do this video chat? Did it help them close the client? Did it help them solve their problem without having to come into the branch? And then what do the customers say? Does that match up? And then the low maintenance. So, when we talk to IT folks, hey, we're IT folks too. It's, hey, we're not trying to add something else that you have to worry about, that you have to go add, another resource for, open up a rec for, just trying to make those headaches as minimal as possible, and not have to do it from that standpoint. And then making it flexible from the user experience side. So, integrating into an existing app very easily within a couple of days. A lot of banks that we talk to, want to run a separate app for this, or they don't have a mobile app, or maybe they have a templated mobile app that, they've licensed. And us being able to build a completely native iOS and Android app for a customer for this technology, with their brand, the bank's branding, and having it in the market within a few weeks, and literally a few weeks. And then the last thing is, scale without constraints. So how do you scale this technology from a total cost per ownership and from resources perspective, with, scaling it today and then scaling it in the future? And so what you see over here on the right-hand side is just a snapshot of our dashboard, that really, when banks kind of see it, it's kind of the aha moment. It's browser-based, don't need anything, a SaaS model, and it really allows you to plug and play this into banks. So what we've heard from banks that they really love the most is you could have branch employees using this, you can have centralized employees using this, and we've allowed kind of skills-based routing to be able to put folks into queues. And then the other thing that's really nice that we actually rolled out for banks is the ability for each branch employee to have their own ID number. And so if you're dealing with private client, if you're dealing with, taking somebody through a mortgage process, being able to have them be able to direct dial you through that video, and connect to that particular bank employee, is really great in being able to keep that relationship. And then all the reporting kind of analytics that go behind it. So just wanted to, kind of offer a glimpse into that, and show really, kind of some of the plug and play technology from a video banking standpoint. So I'm going to leave some time for questions. I'm going to put up my contact information. If anybody has any additional questions post the webinar that you may be shy to ask. The first question I have is about the handouts. So you should have next to the webinar screen a Q&A. If you need to submit any questions, you can submit them there. And then next to that, there's a little handouts tab. You should have a little icon that says to, and there's 2 PDFs there that you can download from the handout standpoint. If for some reason you're not able to download those, you can shoot me an email and I'll be happy to email those over to you. Again, the webinar is being recorded, and so that will be coming out. We'll send you an email out in a few days when that's ready, from that standpoint. And we do have a white paper on Bank of the Future. There'll be a link to that as well if you want to download that white paper. and that email will go out in 2 to 3 days. So the next question I have is, when thinking about video banking for a community bank, what should we be thinking about doing it in one branch or across multiple branches? I think that's really up to, as we go back to the slide of kind of what are the top areas to roll out of banking. Depending upon how your community bank is set up, it could be, if you already have some centralized functions across your different number of branches, it could be taking some of your branches today that maybe don't have mortgage or credit cards or auto loans or private banking, and offering that to the customers coming into the branches without it, from a specialty standpoint. But, also from a customer acquisition standpoint, depending upon how you're doing your marketing today, as a differentiator, and, wherever your kind of community bank is, as a brand differentiator of trying to get demographics. I know a lot of community banks skew a little older in demographics and are trying to really figure out how to get that 25 to 45-year-old demographic. And that can be, one of the competitive advantages. So if there's any more questions, I'll take any more questions, and then we will wrap it up and give you a couple minutes back from that standpoint. I've got one more question from a technology standpoint, using kind of a WhatsApp or some other technologies out there, would that work for video banking? Again, that kind of goes back to my slide on consumer technology, and the ability, most banks, from a security standpoint, technology standpoint, don't want their customers going in, third-party apps, and having to exchange kind of customer information. So that's kind of one of the things that you might want to take into consideration from that standpoint. Well, I want to thank everybody for attending our Bank of the Future webinar. We are offering, if you want an individualized personal use cases or your own banking ROI, we've created some really cool tools around banking. How things out, and you will get an email when the recording is available if you'd like to share that with some of your colleagues. Thank you guys again for joining. Also on our website under news, there's a podcast. We have an executive innovation podcast that I host. We've had some really great banking CEOs talk about the future of banking. And so if you want to hear what some industry executives are thinking about banking, that's another way to listen to some banking CEOs, both large banks and community banks. So if you're bored, you're working out, you're in the car, and you want to download some pretty good podcasts, that's another place for some resources. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and stay tuned for some future webinars.